Obviously, the narrative that basically was all over the place this year, especially, was when Rogue got good, because obviously, like you implied, everyone did. Well, not everyone. I had them like maybe fourth or fifth or something, but a lot of people were like, right, since all these other teams have upgraded, like, fuck them, are they even a playoff team? Was sort of the question about Rogue, which seems absurd now, but that was actually the take. But the take's logical in a way, because if the MVP was inspired last year, and then everyone thought Hans Sama carried Worlds, if those two players leave, then if other people thought they were only third best anyway, then logically they drop it down, right? So obviously the Malrang move is the big one, because if people don't know, it's not really a secret or a revelation that comp is good. It just somehow it didn't work out in Vitality for whatever reasons. But in terms of Malrang, that is the one where I don't think anyone predicted this come in. It's actually similar to what happened with Yonghoon in Astralis. Like, I don't think anyone really. I never heard any vibes behind the scenes like, watch out though, this guy actually might be really sick. It was more like, who? Okay, I don't think I've ever heard of this guy. Is he going to be good? And so I think the interesting topic to me was this. Thankfully, because of what Inspired's been able to do in NA with Evil Geniuses, luckily he sort of redeemed that part of the story. And the story isn't just like it was cut in Inspired that made it work. But obviously, if you look at the two teams, if you look at when they had Inspired last year before you and they had Malrang now, they are very different teams. And clearly the junglers are massively defining in terms of the style of play. Like basically even how the players seem to engage with the game. Like, it's not really painting with the broader strokes to say the old Rogue one's a bit more conservative and a bit more about farm up, and then you just find like the really obvious but like you can't go wrong sort of engages fight scenarios. Also, they were the classic team for me where if you start a little skirmish and maybe it was ill advised, it's actually the Korean style, you sacrifice the one guy who's caught so the rest of you can get out, and then you think, right, regroup, find another angle, again, small wins, get us back in the game. Whereas I have to say the team I've seen today to this year as it's grown over the year, it is very much the Malrang style of play. Like, people know that he just likes to go in. Like the joke I always say is like he's never seen a jungle angle gank that he didn't like. Every angle just must look good to him. He just finds a way to rationalise it, and then he just goes in and then figures out after the fact. But the team now embraces that. You can see that they follow him up. I think this finals was the craziest example ever. It's like that was just bubbling under the surface, and then the finals it came out in such an insane way. Like the joke I would have is if you took the nameplates off that final, all these Rogue haters, and you showed them it like at the beginning of the year, and you were like, what team and what region would that be? I guarantee you, if they watched only the final of this LEC, they would say like a really aggressive LPL team. Yeah. That's what they would say. They would be like, this has to be like, like top esports or something. Look at the way they just re-engage. They think every fight's like winnable. They're coming back in on that wasn't Rogue, dude. That wasn't Rogue before you and Malrang came. So can you give me some thoughts? What has Malrang brought to the team? What is it? Yeah. Is he consciously doing some of this stuff? Has the team bonded with him? How's it work?
It's actually a much more complex question, but I'll start with what Malrang brings to the table. I think what Malrang brings is creativity in terms of his pathing, and he really understands tempo super well. So he understands what part of the jungle he can give while still being relevant in the game. And he understands, I think, the best in Europe, if not, tied for the second best in Europe with, or the best in Europe with Jankos, with how the jungle role should be played right now, like mathematically speaking, because right now the jungle role has been nerfed multiple times to the point where camps are worth less and there's a lot of catch-up EXP. So he really understands when he can skip camps and go for an aggressive play, and if the net value that he gets from lanes, for example, is higher than the amount of gold that he would get farming, then he will always go for that. So when people... Right.
So he's not just doing psycho ganks like everyone thinks then?
Yeah, so this is what I was talking to you about at the beginning, right? And a lot of people were confused, but I couldn't talk about it because, it's very specific. Sure. So for example, like, if you have Jarvan and you're two camp clearing and you're going through mid before going into bot, you use one turn to attack mid, for example, and in that turn you've missed one camp. But if that one turn ends up being a greater gold value later down the line than that one camp, then that gank is worth it. And even if you're 2 levels down, if you kill like basically 2 camps right now, you're back down to like 1 level down and you're still completely relevant in the game, right? So I think he really understands that gold value very, very well. And another thing is obviously, as I said, the creativity, dodging enemy vision and finding good angles to fight. So a lot of this stuff is extremely beneficial for Rogue, which have always been a lane-centric team. Now, in terms of what he brings from a macro sense, obviously, the direct benefit from having an aggressive jungle like this is that you play more for lanes, and these laners can provide significant advantages, just like what happened in the G2 finals, right? Where we had 3 winning lanes essentially, and I'd say a lot of that comes down to how well Malrang plays. but it also comes down to how well we utilize systems. Now, I think that, first of all, a lot of that comes from both Freddie and I's view on the game, in my opinion, not just the players, because Freddie, for example, has a really, really lane-orientated style, and I think everyone knows this at this point in terms of draft. And I have a very systems-orientated style in terms of like creating consistency and systems inside the game in terms of execution, position, retaking, and all this, right? So what essentially happened was we had the perfect combination, the perfect storm of a jungler that was willing to do anything, not just play for himself, but play for the team, as well as the perfect set of ideas for draft, right? So that we can execute it inside the game, combined with an improved systems approach where we can add consistency to our mid game so we don't fall off. And I mean, that's where the whole rogue time myth came from, right?
Yep.
So people were always like, oh, after 20 minutes they suck. But what really happened was, okay, in this situation, we do this. At level 1, we ward here. When this happens, we do this and we retake like this. Malrang is going to do this to this and this, and he's going to comb this before the game. And this is how we play. So all of these came together. So I'd say that they were very complementary, and that's what allowed him to shine. And what people don't really know about Malrang was that he was actually considered a prodigy when he first started, right? He was a really big deal when he first came, and a lot of teams wanted him. And he debuted the same time that Tarzan did, and he shit on Tarzan when he first started. Now what happened was he took the route where he went to KT and Jin and suffered, and Tarzan went to CV Max and learned the game a lot, and he developed a lot as a player. So what the myth that followed Malrang was that, you know, he would be as good as how good his teams were. So if his teams were really good, he'd be good. But what was really happening was that I felt like he never really had a good team to play for. And the humbling thing about being a player and a coach is that if your teammates are not good, it's actually really hard to make good results. So actually overall, in terms of his style, in terms of understanding what he needs to do on the map, he's very dynamic, he's flexible, and he understands the current meta very, very well. And I forgot to mention one more thing. So I remember saying that he's just going for these ganks because people are inting their wave states. I think there's a lot of laning issues in Europe, and you know, Malrang really, really showed that in spring, where he was basically perma-ganking and getting a kill. Like it was 1 gank, 1 kill, right? But he can also farm. Like he's not stupid. It's really not hard to farm, right? So what ended up happening was the original G2 strategy against us, and a lot of the strategies that people brought against Malrang was that, oh, we're just going to track this guy, we're going to find this guy, and if we know what he does early, it's all good. No, I mean, if he's found, he'll just go farm, and our laners will play better than their laners, and then my jungler will match their jungler, and then we're really happy, right? So yeah, I think that's just kind of the summary, right? But obviously, also a lot of credit goes to the laners in Rogue as well, because I think that they're very, very high level laners too.
Oh, absolutely. Right. One thing I want to ask about specifically, because let's be real, it is just completely associated with Malrang at this point. Yeah. It is the champion Jarvan. Like, the joke is, I actually was doing a watch party for this finals, and on the game where Jankos played Jarvan, there was like a catch at some point. And I was like, why would Malrang go for that though? Because I was looking at, and someone was like, wait, he's not actually the Jarvan this time. I was like, fuck it, he's just so imprinted in my brain that's like, that champion is him. It's just, it seems to fit his style so perfectly. Well, if people don't know, if you go and look it up, right, obviously, yes, that's a champion classically. You will see Jankos default to sometimes in the playoffs. But aside from that, it's not actually considered, if people don't know, it's not even close to the best jungle pick right now. It's not like the shit that you must pick this first in draft. And so if you look, right, if you go and watch the LPL guys, if you watch the LPL playoffs, I think it was played like 5 times. It's barely ever used in the LPL. It's not a champion they're using. They don't think it's super strong, right? And I've noticed in Europe, it tends to be more the Jankos type player takes that because they're a super vet. What they're using it for is like, look, it's got a really good kit no matter how strong it is. And so if I could catch the right people, my super carries kill them all. Brilliant, right? But the Malrang, it just seems to be like the best champion for him no matter what the meta is. Can you give me some sense? Why does it work so well for Malrang and Rogue?
Well, the thing about Jarvan specifically is that he clears really fast. He has extremely strong ganks, right, from level 2 onwards. And he has a super high value kit, even though he's behind in levels, right? So what that allows him to do is it gives us a pick that allows us to move first on the map, 1 turn faster than the enemy can almost always. right? So he can do level 2 ganks, he can skip a camp and gank bot. He's also down to be down 1 level, right? It just brings a lot of utility, and it brings a lot of early game pressure that we can utilize to snowball our leads better. So this has been a really, really beneficial pick for us for that reason. But also what people don't realize about Jarvan is that when people pick, the classic strong 1v1 jungles like Trundle, the identity of these 1v1 jungles that are meta right now is to, go into enemy jungle and find these picks. But what Jarvan brings is that even if you're behind in the game, these 1v1 jungles can push you out, but they can never really kill you because you're going to just EQ out and run away.
Yes,
right?
Sure.
So this makes it very hard to catch them, and it also makes it very easy to get vision for the team, right? Which is where the big meme where we bought 20 pink wards or something came from as well, because his role in the team is to do exactly that, facilitate the lanes and find vision and really find the enemy jungle and make the game like really lane orientated, right?
Was he going too far with the pink quads? Would you agree?
Yeah, of course.
Wasn't there a game where he had like 20 or something?
I mean,
that's a pretty good. Instead, if you're a support player, you'd get like full marks from the coach for that. But like for a jungler, for a ganking jungler, that seems a bit wild.
Yeah, I mean, he knows too, right? But I also think in his defense, it was actually a really hard game to play in terms of like. Just turtling and buying time, and what you need to do in those situations is to just constantly move your defensive vision so that your laners can play. And I think his mentality in the game was, okay, he will get the vision and then my laners can catch up faster. And of course, in one sense it was right, but in another sense there were a couple of really efficient spots that you could just chuck it and then like play with his flag or something, right? So, yeah. I mean, he's definitely not the perfect player, but he is, I think, a really, really, really good world-class player. And people have been underestimating him and undervaluing him for such a long time because it's so different to how European junglers play in terms of efficiency. Now, the question that I have to ask the Europeans and all these doubters are then, okay, are you sure that the European way of jungling is the correct way to play in this current...
Yeah, I have a topic on someone asked about.
Yeah, and of course I can go more into detail about that, but that was also one of the reasons why I told you in the Fnatic instance where I couldn't go into detail more. I remember you asking, okay, what do you think about Fnatic? And I said, I can't go into it because I think it's very specific and, it might give off hints. And I think we proved that when we went 3-1 against them, right? We're able to pick things like Lucian Nami every game, play double mage, and we're still getting away with it. So,
Well, let me ask the segue then, because I actually had a similar question.
Yeah.
One area I've noticed that, especially Westerners, that this is the two that they always go on about with Malrang is one is he always picks really unusual rune choices, and then they think sometimes he picks the one that like isn't the one for the style he's going to play, as opposed to that champion you would go this one or Conqueror, whatever whatever the angle would be, right? They think he's got an unusual one on that. So I'm very interested in what you think about that because you said he's quite a calculating player. And then the second angle is this, and this is one where I've tried to almost push back here, but I know that like I'm not a pro, so a lot of people won't care about this, mate. When they say he never completes the items, I've actually noticed that's a really Korean thing compared to any other region in the world. The other regions really do, by the way. I think the West is terrible for just building the build no matter what is happening in the game, just completing the build that in solo queue you do and that you win with most of the time. I think the West they just really do believe like this is the best item second, this is the best item third, right? But I've noticed in his case, obviously people critique it if he doesn't complete the item, but he reminds me a lot more actually of, it's actually even how Koreans played StarCraft, if you don't know. You might have the opening set down, I'm going to do an opening like this, but as the game goes on, you constantly are adjusting like the tech path and like how much you harass or defend based on the opponent. It's like a chess match, isn't it? You're trying to like even it out. So I've noticed that some of the Korean players want actually they don't want to like commit to one path when the game's uncertain in a way, or if the game looks like it's starting to turn into a different type of game, they're sort of willing to be behind on their item build to be like, I'm going to go more towards this type of an item next instead of I won't complete that one. I got the health from it, but now I actually want to get this thing because maybe this game's about Baron, for example, or maybe this game's going to be more about like defense or whatever. Can you give me some thoughts on these two angles?
Yeah, for sure. One about the itemization, I think it is like player dependent. But I can say for sure that I think a lot of pro players are not intelligent with the way they build. I'm not actually an item expert myself.
Fair enough.
When I was lane coaching and I was like really paying attention to this stuff, sure, but I think it's one of those things where you need to spend a lot of time memorizing and kind of like updating on the patches and changing your builds and doing a lot of theory crafting. And that's not really my job. My job is to like make a really strong, coherent, consistent team, right? So the person that comes in to help us with that is actually Nico, our head of analytics. And a lot of people don't give him enough credit for this. But we have a full set of analysts that work with us, and they really go in depth about gold gold efficiency and how good that is. And combined with that, as you said, Korean mindset of being a little bit adaptive to each situation, we're able to pick that up and find quite efficient builds in a lot of situations. I'm not saying that some of his builds are the most efficient, because I know for a fact that, our analysts weren't particularly on board with that either. Right? Sure. That was like, I think that gives enough of a background there. But in a lot of cases, I think, for example, double ruby crystal, like giant spell, these things are like super gold efficient items, especially if you're, a low resource tank, right? So yeah, these are things that we implement very well. And also, where that Korean mindset comes from is, in my opinion, exactly what you said, which is like the StarCraft idea of being adaptive. I think like people like Fantasy and Boxer and even like Flash, these were people that were very well known for this, right? Going into go 2 racks into Valkyrie build, for example, or Vulture drop build. These things were all like innovated, and Malrang grew up with that stuff too. I know for a fact he plays a little bit of Brood War as well. So I think a lot of these little things influence the way that he thinks about the game and what he wants to do. And they are still well thought out. They're not things that are done for no reason. For example, I saw the other day where a couple content creators, I don't specifically remember who, maybe it was LS, was talking about the inefficiency of Chemtech, the heal cut item, the 800 gold heal, right. Execution is calling, sorry.
There you go.
And they were talking about how inefficient that completed item was, but what he's really building that for example, is like, if you're versing a jungler and you're trying to get vision on your own, in his respective role in the team, if he has to get vision on his own, he needs to be able to win 1v1, or he needs to be able to pressure, and he can't do that without reducing the healing of the enemy jungler. So even if it's a gold inefficient item overall, it can be extremely gold efficient in the circumstances of our game. And that's kind of where it comes in, right? And also things like lethal tempo too, right? When he takes lethal tempo in Jarvan, it's a very, very uncharacteristic rune, same for phase rush. But the reason people take it is, once again, like, okay, you're playing versus Vi, for example, Jarvan versus Vi. Jarvan's stronger level 2. He wants to go for a level 2 invade where he's stronger, fast, into enemy jungle. And he knows for a fact that when he takes Lethal Tempo, he just does more DPS than he would when he takes Conqueror. So even though overall, and when you look at a game from a 30-minute or 25-minute perspective, these runes may be less effective, if you're able to get gold value from getting real leads inside the game, then does that really matter, right? So I think that item spikes and rune advantages can really be situational, and it's the same for things like Scorch. I know that a lot of people were against the rune Scorch and the sorcery tree, but I know that, for example, my mid laner Larson takes Scorch in a lot of matchups, especially after the buffs, because it makes a difference in lane in terms of how many potions you drink, and that actually ends up being 2 to 3 waves. So people don't actually go too far in right. The whole game tree and game theory tree, and I actually feel like that level of understanding is lower. That's why they don't do that. And if you see Larson's stats, I mean, they don't lie. He's, I think, the best laner in the West. I think, personally, I think that when he's on control mages, he's the best player at control mages, and a lot of that comes down to his prowess with itemization, with runes, with how smart he is about laning and positioning and pushing those leads.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.